Our guests today are novelists Natalie Jenner and A.H. Kim. We're very lucky to have Anne with us today. Originally, Michael Zapata was going to be with us, and he couldn't be here because of a family illness. And then Natalie said, I have the perfect person. We have so much to talk about. I met her just before the pandemic began. So we're really looking forward to this conversation. If you've not been with us before, we always start with a reading from each of our guests. And then we have a conversation about our reading lives and how that intersects with our writing lives. And at the end, there's time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can put them either in the chat or at the bottom of your screen. There's a little Q&A box. You can put them there too. Who would like to read first?
I feel like Natalie's is the featured person, so I think she should go first.
No, I'm not, but my book is so new, it still smells. It's The Art. So it actually isn't out yet, and it comes out on May 17th. And I'll read from it because this reading will be the first time that almost anyone in the world has heard this book. It's only just come up on NetGalley, and Goodreads giveaways are on right now.
I believe the number 4 most requested book on NetGalley.
Yeah, it's really, you know, I have a great publisher, and they're very excited about this book, and they really cover a lot of territory in promoting. So I'm very lucky. My books get a really great head start. And this book is a standalone book. My first book, The Jane Austen Society, which is right there, which came out about a year and a half ago. And there's a character from that book that carries over into this book. But this is really about a ragtag group of people working in a bookshop in Bloomsbury, London in 1950. And it is a bookstore run by men. And there are 3 main female characters who are going to find themselves in a bit of a battle of the sexes at work. I call it Mad Men meets You've Got Mail. And every chapter in the book is headed by one of the 51 rules that the general manager, who is quite stringent, has come up with for the shop. And they're not in any particular order. The content of each character is the staff's subversion of the rule. No one ever obeys the rules. So I will start reading the first few pages of chapter 2. Chapter 2, rule number 12. First aid procedures shall be strictly adhered to in the event of an emergency. The tyrant was Alec McDonough, a bachelor in his early 30s who ran the new books, fiction, and art department on the ground floor of Bloomsbury Books. He had read literature at the University of Bristol and been planning on a career in something big. Vivian accused him of wanting to run a small colony when the war had intervened. Following his honorable discharge in 1945, Alec had joined the shop on the exact same day as Vivian. By an hour ahead, like a dominant twin, she would quip whenever Alec was awarded with anything first. From the start, Alec and Vivian were rivals, and not just for increasing control of the fiction floor. Every editor that wandered in, every literary guest speaker, was a chance for them to have access to the powers that be in the publishing industry. As 2 secretly aspiring writers, they had each come to London and taken the position at Bloomsbury Books for this reason. But they were also both savvy enough to know that the men in charge were whom they first needed to please. Alec had a clear and distinct advantage when it came to that. Between the tales of wartime service, shared grammar schools, and past cricket match victories, Vivian grew quickly dismayed at her own possibility for promotion. Sure enough, within weeks, Alec had entrenched himself with both the long-standing general manager, Herbert Dudden, and his right-hand man, Frank Allen. By 1948, Alec had ascended to the post of head of fiction, and within the year had added new books and art to his oversight, an achievement that Vivian still referred to as the annexation. She had been first to call him the tyrant. He called her nothing at all. Vivian's issues with Alec ranged from the titles they stocked on the shelves to his preference for booking events exclusively with male authors who had served in war. With her own degree in literature from Durham, Cambridge still refusing in 1941 to graduate women, Vivian had rigorously informed views on the types of books the fiction department should carry. Not surprisingly, Alec disputed these views. But he doesn't even read women, Vivian would bemoan to Grace, who would nod back in sympathy while trying to remember her grocery list before the bus journey home. I mean, what? One Jane Austen on the shelves? No Catherine Mansfield, no Porter. I read that Salinger story, The New Yorker, he's going on about. Shell-shocked soldiers and children all over the place. I don't see what's so masculine about any of that. Unlike Vivian, Grace did not have much time for personal reading, an irony her husband often pointed out. But Grace did not work at the shop for the books. She worked there because the bus journey into Bloomsbury took only 20 minutes. She could drop the children off at school on the way, and she could take the shop newspapers home at the end of the day. Grace had been the one to suggest that they carry import magazines, in particular the New Yorker. Being so close to the British Museum and the theater district, Bloomsbury Books received its share of wealthy American tourists. Grace was convinced that such touches from home would increase their time spent browsing, along with jazz music on the wireless by the front cache, one of many ideas that Mr. Dunham was still managing to resist. Vivian and Alec had now manned the ground floor of the shop together for over 4 years, circling each other within the front cash counter like wary lions inside a small coliseum. The square enclosed counter had been placed in the center of the fiction department in an effort to contain an old electrical outlet box protruding from the floor. Mr. Dunham could not look at this eyesore without seeing a customer lawsuit for damages caused by accidental tripping. Immediately upon his promotion to general manager in the 1930s, he had ordained that the front cash area be relocated and built around the box. This configuration had turned out to be of great benefit to the staff. One could always spot a customer coming from any direction, prepare the appropriate response to expressions ranging from confused to hostile, and even catch the surreptitious slip of an unpurchased book into a handbag. Other bookshops had taken note of Bloomsbury Books' ground floor design and started refurbishing their own. The entire neighborhood was, in this way, full of spies. Grace and Vivian were not the only two bookstore employees out and about, checking on other stores' window displays. London was starting to boom again after 5 long years of post-war rationing and recovery, and new bookshops were popping up all over Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury was home to the British Museum, the University of London, and many famous authors past and present, including the pre-war circle of Virginia Woolf, E.M. Forster, and Lytton Strachey. This made the district a particularly ideal location for readers, authors, and customers alike. And so it was here on a lightly snowing day on the 2nd of January, 1950, that a young Evie Stone arrived, Mr. Allen's trading card in one pocket and a one-way train ticket to London in the other. Can you hear me? I can't hear anybody.
Yes, I
Yes.
had unmuted myself. It kicked me. I can't wait to read that book. I'm completely sucked in now. It's so fun because it's, a story, but then it has all of the little lit geek pieces for those of us who are English majors,
Yeah, it's kind of layered that way. I had a lot of fun with it. And it's, I'm a former bookshop owner. So I opened my own little bookshop. 1,000 books, 500 square feet, and I ran it all myself. And this book was very cathartic and therapeutic. So anyways, it's my love letter to bookshops and to the people that wander in. And I never had more fun in my life. And I didn't leave the house once while writing it, because I wrote it the first, May, June of 2020. The minute my book came out, I started writing it. And then I finished in the fall. I went for a mammogram. That was it. So it's a book that was just so wonderful for me to, what it's like as writers. You're all writers. It's that escaping to somewhere you love, that happy place. And that for me is bookshops. So.
Well, I can't remember when I haven't loved, first libraries and then bookshops. When I was a teenager, full of all that adolescent angst, on Friday nights, I would take the bus over to a really fabulous bookstore called Pickwick that had a very full selection of fiction, and they had stairs leading up to the back office. And I would spend 2-3 hours on those stairs. I didn't have the money to buy them. And everyone who worked there was like, "Hi, Jody. Yeah, there's, here, read this." And the first place when we travel is always finding the bookstore. So, that's a really, personal thing for me. And having read your first book, The Jane Austen Society, I'm so excited to read Bloomsbury Girls because Evie was my favorite character, and to know more about her. She's the most, they're all very interesting, but she's the most intriguing because she's a surprise. She's working essentially as a maid, and yet there's all sorts of things percolating in her that are inspired by Jane Austen in particular. So this is a find. I've been a huge fan of yours, and this book is I'm March. I hate to have to wait till March, but
May, but
May. Oh, even worse.
so long enough. But Anne wrote an amazing book, and I'm very excited to. I've never heard you read from A Good Family, so. I'm
And
excited.
I'm going to retroactively read Natalie's bio. We started talking and I didn't want to interrupt the flow. And then I'm going to read your bio as well, Anne. So Natalie, who just read for you, is the author of 2 books, the instant international bestseller, The Jane Austen Society, which we've just been discussing, and then the book that she just read from, the Bloomsbury Girls, available in May. The Jane Austen Society was a Goodreads Choice Award finalist for Best Debut Novel and Historical Fiction. It was a USA Today and #1 national bestseller and will be translated into 20 different languages worldwide. Natalie was born in England and raised in Canada. She's been, in addition to a bookstore owner, a corporate lawyer, a career coach, and she lives in Oakville, Ontario now she lives in Ontario now with her family and 2 rescue dogs who we were hearing about earlier. A.H. Kim, who's going to read for us now, is an immigrant, a graduate of Harvard College and Berkeley Law, a lawyer, and the mother of 2 sons. She lives in San Francisco with her husband. A Good Family is her first novel. Lisa Ling, the host of CNN's This Is Life, said of A Good Family, a story of money, family, who you can trust, and the extremes to which one will go for blood. I couldn't put it down. So I'm really looking forward to hearing a reading from it.
Thank you, Ginger and Jody, for hosting, and thank you, Natalie, for inviting me to join you. So this is my novel, A Good Family. It came out July of 2020, perfect timing for the pandemic. And it is based very, very loosely on my personal experience supporting my brother and his children while his wife was doing time at Alderson Women's Prison for a white-collar crime. So this is the story of told from 2 perspectives. Hana is a Korean-American law librarian, and Beth is her brother's wife, who's going to prison, and she's this very glamorous Swedish-American pharmaceutical executive. So what I like to say is that everything in A Good Family is true, and nothing in A Good Family is true. So many of these stories are based on actual experiences in my life, but of course, they've been highly fictionalized. So the part that I will read to you is, I think, at the beginning of the book. Yeah, and it's the goodbye scene where the mother says goodbye to her children. So I'm going to warn you, I might get a little choked up here because it is really based on a true life experience. Everyone gathers in the great room, getting ready to depart. They're all lined up along the front wall, fair-haired and blue-eyed, reminding me of the Von Trapp children introducing themselves to Fraulein Maria. Despite their eagerness to get home, none of the Lindstroms wants to leave. Not yet, not until they've watched the pivotal scene of the Lifetime Network family melodrama that is their new life. Are you ready to go, Claire and Allie? Karen asks. Mommy, I don't want to go with Aunt Karen, Claire cries. I want to go with you and Daddy. Claire runs to Beth and holds tight to her legs. Little sister Allie follows suit, nodding in agreement, not understanding anything that's going on. Girls, remember I told you, Beth says gently, Auntie Karen is going to drive you to our Princeton house, and Daddy and Auntie Hannah are going to drive Mommy to camp. Don't you remember I told you? It was my idea to tell the girls that Mommy was going away to camp. I loved the fact that it was both true and misleading at the same time. Like a good law librarian, I made sure to do my research. In the U.S. Bureau of Prisons hierarchy, the facilities with the least security are called federal prison camps, or camps for short. In contrast with the medium security federal correctional institutions or high security federal penitentiaries, camps like Alderson don't have guard towers or barbed wire fences or even locked cells. If you squint hard enough at the grainy Google Maps image, Alderson looks like it could be one of the Seven Sisters all-women colleges, only with fewer lesbians and more dental problems. Now I feel ashamed. I've been spending too much time with lawyers and gotten used to using precision with words as a way to avoid harsh truths. To what purpose? To trick a 5-year-old into believing that her mother is going to sleepaway camp instead of prison? You're going to miss my first day of kindergarten, Claire says. As her eyes fill with tears, the adults avert their gaze. We all know Beth will be missing much more than that. I like to keep it short and sweet.
Incredible.
It
Yeah.
really pulls the reader in. I mean, right now, I just wish you would read the whole thing to me. You've got a lovely reading voice and precise, as a matter of fact.
So I thought Natalie would appreciate that in particular because we're both lawyers by training, and that phrase about using precision with words as a way to avoid harsh truths. I think that's sort of in some ways the magic of writing.
Yeah,
That's brilliant. Yeah.
That could lead to our first question. So are there authors that you think of when you say that phrase, authors who use the precision with words to maybe deliver harsh truths, but in an exact way?
Well,
I
go
sorry,
ahead. I'll go with it. I think the obvious, which is Jane Austen.
Yes.
She just uses her language I'll admit, I actually did not read Jane Austen for many, many years because growing up, it felt to me like the kind of like girl books that, girls were sort of steered to read. And I wanted to read like, I don't know, Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, or like I wanted to read Dickens. I wanted to read like the real stuff. And so I didn't discover Jane Austen until I was probably in my 20s, until I was an adult. And I'm sort of glad that I did, because I think it takes some maturity to understand that it's not just the pretty story that you have. It's not the happily ever after, kind of Harlequin romance. There's so much social skewering and like social commentary embedded in that pretty language. So I just think she's the master of using words in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think another author that's really affected me, who is extremely precise with her use of language and conveys the ultimate pain of the human condition, is Virginia Woolf. And I have Orlando here, which is, obviously not one of the more traumatic reading experiences with her, but I don't know if anyone has ever picked a more precise and perfect word in every sentence to the level and extent that she has. When it comes to Jane Austen, and what's fascinating is that I found her I was lucky. I found her before adolescence. I found her when I was 9 in my parents' bookshelves. I mean, it was a book that had pictures and it came in a box. And that's what attracted me to it. But the minute I started reading it, and you guys will know this when you have a writer's observation and ear for language, the minute I started reading her, even though I wasn't really aware of what was at stake for these characters in terms of their social desperation, fear of poverty, uncertainty, unsettlement, the prose, the way she wrote, struck my ear like music. And so I got enamored with her very young, before I would have been, I think, pop culturized into thinking exactly what I think we are sort of taught in the shorthand of modern pop culture. That chick lit kind of chick litification of her that sort of happened a bit, which is another reason I wrote the Jane Austen Society, is I wanted to reclaim her a bit for men. Half my 8 main characters are men, and men. I have a male audiobook narrator. I think, Anne, I believe, did you listen to the audiobook rather than?
I did. Oh
Yeah.
my God, he's so good.
Good.
You fall in love with the voice.
Oh yeah, like it's just like honey. It's just, he's wonderful. And actor Richard Armitage. And I really had learned that up until sort of the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen had as many male fans as female. And that from an academic perspective, Nabokov and like a lot of really famous literary scholars and academics had sort of really embraced her and adopted her and analyzed her and put her in the canon, rightly so. And so I really loved that. And I wanted to, and I think one of the great things about getting published is you have these little secret mandates or missions you're not even aware of. And one of them was I wanted to get people reading Emma again, because I love Emma. And I think it really gets a little missed, because it's, oh yeah, exactly. I wanted to get people reading Emma again, and I wanted to get men reading Jane Austen again. And I'm not saying I've done that, but it was my little secret kind of mission. And when men readers do reach out to me and say, I don't even read fiction, and I loved your book. I'm just like, oh yeah, job well done for like a year. Like I'm happy, you know. So yeah, so I think Virginia Woolf and Austen. Somebody that I think I'm interested to know what you guys think about this very formative influence on me. Precision of language, but very verbose, is Henry James. Henry James is a huge influence on me, but I think it's perceived as writing a bit like, I don't know, very plodding. My daughter, who's at university studying English, told me he dictated his books. I was like, oh, well, that explains everything, right? That explains the one-page paragraphs. But Henry James is another one that he picks. Oh man, he is conveying such atrocious human behavior beneath the most beautiful but lengthy sentences. And I really love James.
And didn't you say before we started recording that your dog is named Henry James?
Yeah, my atrocious beagle, who just decorated my living room with flour the other day, that he got his little nose into. So, yeah.
So what kinds of books do you have on your to be read, or not to be read, excuse me, what books have you been reading that have resonated with you as a writer?
And keep going first.
Oh, so I feel like my agent's going to kill me. I just write all over the place. So, you know, A Good Family was sort of this family drama. Some might call it a thriller. Then the second book that I wrote, which I haven't gone under submission, but Natalie knows this, is a Sense and Sensibility kind of reboot. Told in modern day in Northern California. It was sort of like my comfort write, because it's just, you know, I already know where the plot is going. So then I just got to indulge myself in character and dialogue and description and stuff. So all the fun stuff was there. And then I wrote a third book, which again is not under submission, which is more like the first book, which is this sort of family drama thriller. And so now, while I'm waiting for my agent to get back to me, I decided, oh, well, let's just do something completely different. So I'm working with my friend Stephanie Wildman on a middle grade book. And it's set here in San Francisco, and it has to do with some local politics kind of stuff. So let's see. So what I'm reading right now is I just finished. So of course I Googled like best-selling middle grade books or most popular middle grade book, just to see like what do kids like to read. So I finished this last week, which is Wonder. Such a good book, and it was made into a movie as well. I'm reading this right now called A Good Kind of Trouble, which is about the Black Lives Matter movement. Also so good, really enjoying it. Just about a quarter of the way into that. And the next one up on my queue is this book called George. And it's about, I don't know if you would say transgender, but like a questioning child, questioning their gender. So I am just amazed at the quality and the sort of the complexity of some of the issues that these middle grade books are handling and tackling. And so I'm inspired because I've got some tough issues that I want to include in my middle grade book. And I was worried that maybe that's going to be too much for middle grade. It's nothing compared to these issues. So I'm really excited.
It's interesting. I'm actually waiting for my agent to get back to me too. My book 3. And so I don't know if he's watching, but my book 3 is set in Italy in the mid-50s and follows a new character from Bloomsbury Girls. So we'll see what happens. But because of that, it actually takes place at Cinecittà, the film studio outside of Rome. And so I'm reading a lot about film. And so one of the things that I'm looking at right now is this book called Picture by Lillian Ross of the New Yorker. And it's an account of John Huston's making of A Badge of Courage back in the 50s. So I do a lot of nonfiction writing, reading when I'm writing. So I don't know about you guys, but I have a hard time. I don't like reading fiction, new fiction, when I'm writing aggressively the first draft, because I tend to absorb things very porously. So for me, I tend to read a lot of nonfiction or classics, books where I know I won't adopt the prose or the content. Not that I'm a pilferer or a thief, but I do worry about that creative subconscious mind, because I write without, I'm a pantser. And so I don't know what's going to happen from sentence to sentence. And so because of that, there's less, you feel less in control. Sometimes I'll come up with a really great line and my husband's like, did you come up with that line? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. It just came to me. But I'm also reading, just read, because we all, having debuted in the pandemic, we've really bonded. And I got an arc of Acts of Violet, Margarita Montemore's new book, USA Today bestselling author in the pandemic for Una Out of Order, which was a huge, huge hit. And this is an amazing, modern book about a female magician, like a female version of David Copperfield, who goes missing in the middle of her great act. And this is going to be a huge hit next summer. July. So this is the kind of reading I think that we all get to do. We get early editions of things before the rest of the world. And how lucky are we? And then a couple of things that I'm reading as well, which I've never read before, Reflections in a Golden Eye by Carson McCullers. And what's really fascinating is I got to a point in the middle of the book and I said to my daughter, I don't think this had been written about yet. And I looked it up on Wikipedia, and sure enough, it's known to be one of the first books to talk, I won't give it away, spoiler alert, but to talk about a certain aspect of human sexuality. And I thought that was really fascinating, from the 40s. And My Henry James, a book I'd never heard about before, called The Reverberator. So this is one of those obscure, and I think it's the Pushkin, is it? Yeah, it's the Pushkin Press. They do these really great, obscure, sort of small little novellas that you can read in an afternoon. And then the last one to show you guys, because I'm so in love with it, is my friend Barb Heller just had her publisher send me this new gift copy of Little Women. And what's so amazing about this is that all the letters and all the documents that get referred to are in these little envelopes. And she's had like over a dozen different scribes do different penmanship for each character. And it's really beautiful. So like there's a letter to Joe, and it's like written like it would have been in those days. But there's ephemera in there as well. And this is like the book to give the little woman lover in your life for Christmas. And so again, like Anne, just very broad, very piecemeal, and just very responsive to whatever I'm kind of feeling in the moment. And I do read really broadly as a result as well. Yeah.
Natalie, I want to read, when you talk about film books, have you read Conversations by Walter Murch and Michael Adachi?
No, but Michael Ondaatje is one of my favorite authors. Okay, thank you.
And he's one of mine. And I have to say, I read this book and I really loved it because how it was written. I'm not a huge, I love going to films, but I don't think about the making of them in particular. It's called The Art of Editing Film. And I'm going to recommend that to you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. That's great.
Sure.
Because your to be read pile isn't big enough, right, Natalie? None of us has too big of a to be read pile.
I guess every week my husband finds me like in a room building another IKEA bookcase. He's like, what are you doing in there? I'm just like, I need more. Like, it's like, where's that going? I'm like, I'll find space. But yeah, you lose control. So sorry, Ginger, I really want to know what Anne read when she was little. Can I?
So I know some of the books that you mentioned, and it's funny, I actually didn't read those books, the Harriet the Spy and the Encyclopedia Brown books. I know, I'm sort of embarrassed. But my all-time favorite books were, and I was trying to think what the theme was for them, but I don't know. So the whole Laura Ingalls Wilder set.
Yeah.
And I think for me in particular, as an immigrant, I was born in Korea and I came over when I was about 2 years old. And even though I was obviously just a little baby when I came over, my parents spoke Korean in the home and they didn't know American customs and things like that. So I just was desperate to learn what it was like to be an American person. And so I feel like reading these kinds of books helped me to understand what it was like to be American. And obviously they were historic, but when I think about The Long Winter, I mean, it's got drama, right? It's got the weather. It's got romance a little bit with the introduction of Almanza Wilder, hot Almanza. It's got, I loved, and I really love books where people kind of are constrained or they don't have things and they have to make do. Like how do they somehow manage to live through that long winter? How do they find food? How do they stay warm? Those were like little puzzles that I just love seeing them work their way through. So that was a favorite book. Another favorite book and an author of mine was E.L. Konigsberg's From the Mixed Up
That's one of my
Files of
favorite
Mrs.
books.
Basil.
Yeah. I think it's one of Wes Anderson's as well. He has a direct homage on the Royal Tenenbaums to the
Oh my
plot.
gosh. Yeah. And I think for me, the thing that I loved about this was I grew up in the suburbs. So I really related to the character of Claudia, kind of being stuck in the suburbs and feeling like there's a world out there of excitement and sophistication and New York City, the metropolitan, that's like the pinnacle of all those things. And to be able to escape into that world and to sort of live on your own, to be independent. I still remember the scene where she goes into the fountain and they pick up the wishing coins and they take it to the automat. Like I was like, oh, that's so brilliant. So that's another favorite of mine. And then years later, actually, after I think I was probably too old to technically read it, I read her other. She was one of the few authors to get 2 Newbery medals, and the second one was for this, The View from Saturday, which I love, and I'm actually sort of studying it as a way for how do you structure a middle grade book in a way that's comes from different voices, tells different perspectives. So I love that one. And then, of course, one of my all-time favorites, Charlotte's Web. I remember when I was in second grade, my second grade teacher would read aloud from a chapter book every day. And I think it was, after lunch. And that was my favorite time, just sitting there and listening to her voice. And it was almost like a TV serial where she would read one chapter and then she would say, okay, and that's the end of the chapter. And we'd all be like, no, tell us what happens next. And I think that's a great way to build love of reading for children, is to just have them listen to the stories and for the stories to take over their imaginations. And as soon as she would put the book down, everybody ran to the library to check that book out of the library so they could read it to themselves.
It's like a form of slow reading, which I think in a way is really important because it really bonds. I think we read so fast nowadays. I think the genres and the industry and just the amount of information we can consume. And there's something to be said about getting a little bit every day. And I think it really bonds you empathetically with the characters in the book as well. I had talked about Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. This is my first love. So Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah.
And Anne of Green Gables is a Canadian classic. So what happens is we immigrate from England when I'm just about to start school. And I lived in a very anglicized Canadian household with kippers for breakfast, and some others do have them on the TV. Like, it was very British. And my dad asked around at work, because he was an actuary. He asked around at work and he said, what would be a good Canadian classic for my daughter for Christmas? When I was, I think, 8. And thank goodness someone at work recommended this one, because this is one of those books that's part of a series. To all the writers out there, I think there's something special for children about knowing that there will be more books ahead when they do fall in love with that first one. And I think that's part of the appeal of the little house books for me as well. And Anne of Green Gables was very much about a girl, kind of like a Jane Eyre kind of character. It was very different and very imaginative and a bit of an ugly duckling. I would venture to say that a lot of strong readers when they're young may feel some of the similar qualities. So this was a big one for me. And my Harriet the Spy, which I cannot find, which is devastating for me, on the shelf, but I would recommend Anne you read it, because what's great about Harriet the Spy is she lives in Manhattan. Old Golly is her family's housekeeper. It's like a Woody Allen movie, right? Like, the parents are never around. She goes to a school I don't recognize the name of. She has, like, everyone is doing these things that I just didn't understand, because I was a child of the suburbs as well. So I was very much, it was this exotic, Upper West Side life. And it's like great. And it's a great book. And for what you're doing right now with the middle grade, sort of like thinking about what works. Because Harriet the Spy, I think, probably is more for like closer to 10 than 5, and gets you through, I think, into 11 and 12. The last 2 books, I was very much, it's the classics that kind of really stand on my mind. So I read a lot of Roald Dahl, a lot of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, loved my little Famous 5, Secret 7s, Encyclopedia Browns, like anything where groups of kids are going out and spying on adults. I just ate that up. And then the last 2 I would talk about that I read or was read them by someone in my life, young in life, is Jane Eyre. which,
Oh, I have the
and
same
this,
edition.
yes, well, this is the edition from, I think, Definitely Maybe. No, not Definitely Maybe. Oh yeah, it is Definitely Maybe. Yeah, it's
With
one of the books.
woodcuts.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous. It's these woodcut engravings. Actually, I have a framed picture, a photocopy of this I framed to put on my wall where I write in my shed. Jane Eyre is the ultimate, ugly duckling, gonna get her guy in the castle book for a young girl. But what it really is I think just one of the best plotted books out there for all its flaws, which leads me to my other love when I was young, which was A Tale of Two Cities, which I remember when my daughter was reading this, and she was at camp when she was like 11, and people said they could hear her like screaming through the tent, like she couldn't believe what was happening. It's a rollicking good tale. I love a good plot. I mean, in the end, I think the through line with all the books that I love a good plot first and foremost. And I obviously I write about multiple characters, but for me, there's nothing like you just can't go to bed. And I'll never forget finishing Eye of the Needle. I'll never forget finishing Cain and Abel. There's certain books and you just go along for a ride and you suspend the rest of your life. And whenever anyone says, you made me miss my kid's hockey game, reading your book, like, isn't that the best feeling? Like, I love, it's so subversive. It's like a form of power. So, and then one more actually that I'd love to talk about, which if you Google it, there was an Oprah magazine article on it. It's like secretly influenced a lot of women. I think I was born in the 60s, so like of an older generation. I think it has definitely dated the most of everything I love, but it's called Mrs. Mike. Has a very kind of romantic Harlequin cover. It's about a young woman who has lung problems, and her family sends her from Boston to what is essentially the Canadian outback. So she's out in the Rockies and she falls in love with a mounted police officer, and he takes her up to the Hudson Bay Depot, North Alberta, and they're interacting with the First Nations people there, etc. So it is dated a bit, but it is a classic, and it's pretty much fictional. So you feel when you're reading it that it was this woman's story. But as the years have gone by, it's turned out to be pretty fictional. But it's a wonderful love story. It's a really very much in line, Anne, with what you were saying about the Little House books. It captures like all those same themes. So those are the ones that before I was a teenager, really, I think grabbed a hold of me and made me want to be a writer.
A whole different topic, and I was curious, I've read a few other Korean writers, I think just actually mostly male. Are those books that you look to for inspiration, for guidance, for any kind of influence on structure or language?
I'll say I just read them for pleasure. I think the most famous Korean American author right now is actually probably Minjin Lee, who wrote Free Food from Millionaires was her debut, but then her more famous one is Pachinko that came out a few years ago. So beloved. Just a beautifully, rich, plotted story. Such great language. She's such a champion for literacy and those kinds of issues. So she's just I don't even think I can aspire to be like her. She's just so brilliant. Nancy Ju-Yoon Kim is another author who wrote The Last Story of Mina Lee, which was a Reese Witherspoon pick. And that is a contemporary story of a woman who finds her mother passed away in LA, and she starts to uncover the layers of her mom's life. And it's a really sort of sad and rich story about how immigrants live sort of on the peripheries of our society. Angie Kim, who's a good friend of mine, she wrote a book called Miracle Creek. She also is part of the recovering lawyers group. And it's both a sort of a legal drama, but it's got wonderful mystery to it, as well as I think one of the sort of the more touching and really effective ways of talking about what a person loses when they leave one country and goes to another. And one of the things that they lose is their language. And so, the father in that story, I just remember her reading it at a reading here in San Francisco. you know, he was brilliant and fluent and all these things and powerful in his native Korea. And then he comes here and he has broken English and people look down on him. And so the daughter has to help out and the daughter serves as the translator, which is a lot of what happened in my life as well, where I had to be the translator for my mom. So reading it in a fictional story, but it comes so much from truth. I can't recommend that more highly. My friend Lydia Kong has a bunch of books out. In fact, she just has a nonfiction book out that came out yesterday called Patient Zero, and it's about pandemics. But she also writes all of this literary fiction, so she's brilliant. Anyway, I could go on. And what I like to say is that when I was little, I used to always go to the K section of the library and look for Kim, because Kim is like Smith or Jones all together. I mean, it's the most common last name in Korea. And I was always sort of hoping I would see somebody named Kim who wrote a book in English, and I never did. And now when I go to the K section of my public library here in San Francisco, there are so many Kims, not to mention Lee, Park, Oh, Kang, all the other Korean names out there. I am so proud of the proliferation of Korean American authors.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I do have a question that I've also had sort of brewing since I reread the Jane Austen Society, just finished a couple days ago or yesterday actually. And what I'm most taken with is how quiet a book it is. There's no, serious clashes. There's no horrible, dramatic, neurotic activity. There's no psychotic activity. It's just quiet. And yet it feels like I'm sitting in a room with people who I have quite a rapport with. And I could just as easily be part of the conversation. And that's mostly what it is people getting to know each other over a shared passion for Jane Austen. And it's not, I have to admit, it's not something that I usually read, a book that's that way. No climatic, car accidents. Are there other books that you've read? Like, was that a conscious choice? Is that just organically who you are as a writer?
I mean, I think that what I've absorbed from all the reading that I've done is a certain just kind of narrative voice. I think when people in the industry talk about what most appeals to them with a book, a lot of people in the publishing industry will say that it starts with the voice. And so the types of voices, I mean, it's interesting that we're talking about who we read, because the types of voices that I've read have been pretty calm and pretty much, sort of taking their time. So exactly like the Jane Austen, the Henry James, the Virginia Woolf, but I have this entrancement with plot, which is one of the reasons why I think I love Victorian novels. I mean, I do love a canvas of many different characters going through different experiences. I do like to explore conflict that's interpersonal. I do think that's the lawyer in me. I do like the fascination of ethical quandaries. So more talky. And I do find that when I'm writing, what I'm really doing is creating a world for myself in which I feel some measure of control, in the sense that I have a husband with, very high risk lung disease, and our life had changed dramatically before the pandemic, but certainly very much so since. And when I wrote the Jane Austen Society, we were coming out of the diagnosis and the really scary time. And when I wrote that book, I wanted to create a world where I knew everything was somehow going to turn out okay. And the great irony, Jody, in what happened was that the book sold in December of 2018, so almost exactly three years ago, and nobody knew about the pandemic. So I think that I wrote a book as a form of distraction for myself and hope. I needed to find hope again in my life, and I don't know if you can write a book with thrilling car accidents and crashes and psychotic behavior and get that regeneration of hope. What I wanted with my book was to explore different people, all coping poorly with the challenges of life, but finding sustenance and a new way to behave, both through literature, but through their connection with each other. And that was exactly what I was doing, because in the year before I wrote this book, I spent a year reading Jane Austen and reading about Jane Austen. And as Anne knows, I also watched a lot of Cheers and Frasier. And that was my year, besides my jobs that I had. running my bookshop and being a
Yeah.
career coach. So that's, I think the book was coming from I think the book came from a pretty unique place. And what was interesting with the second book, plug, is that it very much came from a place of happiness. So I mean, I came up with the idea just as the book was hitting the bestseller list. And I remember everyone on my team and everyone was like so relieved because nobody was doing well in the pandemic. It was just an awful time. But it just really got shone on by the publishing gods. Like I was very lucky. I had Jane Austen's jet fuel, and this book got out there and it got hand sold. And I was just very grateful to all, especially the independent booksellers that like really just said, this might make you feel good right now. And so it was weird that I wrote it at a time we weren't aware of what was going to happen, but that's life. We all get that uncertainty in life. The whole point is that you don't see it coming. And yet the bottom line with all the things that I read and I write is some sense of it ain't over till it's over. You don't know what's around the corner. And there's a great poem by the Persian poet Rumi, which is life, act like it's rigged in your favor. And I wanted to write a book that explored that as well. That's the only way to do it. The only way to go.
When it just arrived, as you said, at such a perfect time. And we were all so hungry for community and aware of the community that we had. I mean, losing it made us aware of it, right?
Exactly.
And would you like to speak similarly to what inspired what you were going for when you wrote your book? I loved hearing that from Natalie.
Yeah, mine it's not nearly as beautiful or eloquent, but so I had, gosh, maybe 10 years ago, read this book, The Fault in Our Stars, and I am a breast cancer survivor. And that was 17 years ago. But after that diagnosis, I think there was a part of me that shut down, where I just felt like I just need to put my head down and move forward. And I can't be feeling all the feels, because if I start to feel all the feels, I'm going to break down. So I was just, everybody was like, wow, you're so strong. You're so strong. It's like, yeah, because I'm frozen.
It's avoidance, right, Anne?
Yeah, totally. It was like this emotional, like frozen state. And then I read The Fault in Our Stars, and I don't know what happened, but it just like knocked down that frozen wall. And I was a mess. First of all, I was crying and crying and crying. And I've always loved children's literature. I've always loved YA books. And after finishing that book, I said, I want to write a book that makes people feel that way. But I wanted to write it from a Korean American perspective, because I hadn't read a lot of Korean American YA literature. So I wrote a book totally pantsing. I didn't know how to write a book. I just started writing a book. Went through the process that all of you know of trying to find an agent. And just like everybody was like, oh, it's nice, but it doesn't really have a plot. It's a little bit quiet. It doesn't have a propulsive thing. And so it was it's very frustrating and all those things. And so finally, I kind of had that moment in the movie where the heroine is down and she's like, stands up and she's like, I'll show them, I'm going to write a bestseller. And so that was sort of the genesis of A Good Family, where I said, okay, I'm not going to write a quiet story. I'm going to write one that's a page turner, that has like a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, where, if you've read the book, there's lots of drama throughout the book. People die, there's incidents that happen. There's bad people behaving badly, there's sex, all sorts of sex. So that was my inspiration for the book, which is to sort of get even with the publishing industry by writing something that's a page turner. And so then, easier said than done. And so I thought, okay, well, I want to write a page turner, but what should I write about? And sadly, at that same time, my brother's wife had pled guilty to a whistleblower, or it had pled guilty to a white-collar crime, not a whistleblower that was in the book. And so I sort of had this front row seat to all this drama, including, saying goodbye to the children, which was the basis for that excerpt that I read. I visited her many times in prison. I visited her many times with her children in prison. And around the same time, Orange is the New Black had come out on Netflix. And I think that was one of the first shows that people really just binge watched, right? Because before then, things like HBO, they would put things out 1 week at a time. Whereas this one, they just dumped all the episodes and said, watch them as fast as you want. And people did. And so people were very interested in asking me, like, what's it really like in women's prison? You know, is it true that they get to go shopping? Is it true that they do their own cooking? You know, like, what kind of clothes do they wear? And so I was fielding a lot of questions from my friends that people were super interested in it. And I thought, I think this is it. I think this is the story that turns out to be the page turner. And the book, you know, pretty much wrote itself after that.
That's a great story. And it's done so well. I'm glad you stuck it to the publishing industry.
Yeah, I'm sure they're ruining the moment that they didn't take me as a client.
Well, I know before we have just a few minutes left, but before we started recording, so I'll tell our audience, both Natalie and Anne were revealing that they had all of these stacks of books that they had prepared like lawyers for the show. We may have gone through their stacks, but if there are any stacks that you guys have that we haven't yet, you know, gotten to see, we'd love to see them.
My teen stack, I'll just very quickly. Agatha Christie.
Oh yeah.
Right? Just again, to get the same thing over and over again, but in different variations. My Catcher in the Rye, the cover's fallen off. This was the first book where voice really affected me, where I just sat up like a bolt and I went, what the heck is that? Like, I'm in this like kid's head. And I just remember it was so visceral. One of my all-time favorite books, top 3, Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, which is just the most gorgeous account of a family at its end. And it's really an amazing miniseries. Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I actually read all of her first 3 or 4 books when I was a teenager. And this was my first real exposure. I mean, you know, she was a child of rape and she didn't speak, you know, for a while because of that. It was a family member. Like, this was my first experience of reading about the worst trauma, you know, that you can inflict on someone, and her experience of overcoming that and what she did with her life has remained like a lifetime inspiration for me. I am a child of the 70s. So the last book I would mention is emblematic of the kinds of things that I read as a teenager. So my Judith Krantz, my Colleen McCullough, The Thornbirds, Jaws, Cain and Abel, Jeffrey Archer, like, again, like, these are, you know, big, thick airport kind of size books, right? But these are the books that keep you up at night and that you like plow through in a few days, you know, at the cottage or the beach. So those were the types of books that I was reading, again, all over the place. But these are like, yeah, some of my favorites.
Seeing your book pile, Natalie, I'm like, wait, I want to go grab this book. I want to grab that book. So I will say that some of my favorite authors are John Irving. I think that I've read not every book, not some of the more recent ones, but like I loved his books. He was one of those authors that as soon as a book came out, I just go buy it in hardback, even though I couldn't afford it, because I loved him so much. And I think what I love particularly about him, he has such a different style from other books that I read. I just loved how intricate his worlds were. He just had, like, you know, dwarves and circuses and incestuous families. Like, he just threw everything in there, and yet you just loved all the characters. And I just remember at the end of every book, I would kind of sort of see how many pages I had left, and then I would sort of start to just read them 2 pages at a time.
Read it out, yeah.
Because I knew that as soon as I read the last word, I would be bereft. I would be like in mourning for a week because I would miss those characters so much. And then another author that I'll read anything that she writes is Curtis Sittenfeld.
Oh, absolutely.
She has, like, I just, from prep all the way to like her most recent collection of short stories, she's got such humor and humanity in her writing. And I think also the themes that she have been pretty varied throughout her works. So she's another author that I'll just read anything that she writes, including her
Another
grocery
huge
list.
fan of Jane Austen. She's, I think Jane Austen is very much these stories of manners. And then I think very quickly, shout outs for Ian McEwan, his Atonement, I could not put down. Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro is one of my all-time, top 10 books. Michael Ondaatje from Canada, especially In the Skin of the Lion, which is an amazing book. I know most people have heard of The English Patient. And Susan Mina and Penelope Fitzgerald. So Susan Mina, incredible Northeastern States writer. Penelope Fitzgerald won the Booker for The Blue Flower and came to writing in middle age. I think she was in her 40s and 50s as well. And she wrote 5 or 6 perfect jewels of books. They're very short. You can read them in a day. And they are, talk about precision, conveying dark truths. Penelope Fitzgerald. That's your girl.
Thank you. I have one of hers in my to be read stack.
Oh yeah.
As we were discussing earlier, I've not read her yet, but I have one in my stack, so maybe I'll move it up the pile. So that's it. We didn't have any questions come in. So I will just let everyone know what the next show is that's coming up. Our next show will be on December 15th at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll be talking with the novelist Lindsay Ellis and the poet Bridget Bianca. You can find out more about this show and register at our website, www.whowritersread.com. You can also find the archives there and a link to our bookshop. All of the books that were mentioned today will be listed in our bookshop. So if you have any questions, you can find them there. Natalie and Ann, this was just fantastic. Thank you both so much. I really, really enjoyed it.
And I second that. These things that we're doing, Who Writers Read, has been as illuminating for Ginger and I as it's been for our guests, as it's been for those attending. This is exactly what we had fantasized when we first started planning about it. It's like these kinds of conversations, and you two have just been genuinely involved and giving and write amazing books. So thank you so very much for joining us. And hopefully you'll tune in for the next ones, even though you're not on it, and let your friends know about the archive videos, which you'll be able to see on YouTube via our website. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
talking
you.
with you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye,
Ann, for
everyone.
joining.